Welcome back to my channel, where we uncover the forgotten corners of the past. Today, I'm taking you into a story about the classified inbred clan of Appalachia, locked in a house for 40 years, that you might have never heard before, a mystery buried in the dust of time, a truth that will send shivers down your spine. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to let me know where are you listening to this story from. That helps me understand how far these secrets have traveled. And if this story truly captivates you, if it makes you ponder, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe to the channel to keep me going. Together, we'll explore the darkest pages of history, and you won't want to miss a thing. There are places in this world where silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a presence in itself, thick, watchful, and unyielding. In the spring of 1961, deep within the tangled wilds of Pine Hollow, two state surveyors stumbled upon such a silence. It was not the hush of nature, nor the quiet of abandonment, but something denser, as if the air itself had been pressed flat by the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. There, veiled by decades of unchecked growth, they found a house that should not have existed, a structure absent from every map, every ledger, every memory but its own. The house stood as a monument to erasure. Its windows were boarded from within, and the front door was sealed by rusted iron spikes driven deep into the threshold. No path led to its porch. No footprints marred the moss that crept up the rotting boards. The remaining glass was blackened with pitch, reflecting nothing but the surveyor's own uneasy faces. There was no driveway, no mailbox, no sign that anyone had entered or left in living memory. And yet, the house endured upright and defiant, as if daring the world to remember what it had so carefully forgotten. What compels a family to vanish so completely? What horror, what doctrine, what unspoken law could drive generation after generation to lock themselves away, to erase every trace of their existence but the echo of their own blood? These are the questions that lingered in the minds of those who first breached the silence of Pine Hollow. They are the questions that will haunt us as we descend into the heart of this story, a story not merely of isolation, but of a lineage that folded in upon itself until nothing remained but ritual, repetition, and ruin. To understand how such a place could come to be, one must first step back and let the land itself speak. Pine Hollow, nestled in the shadowed spine of Appalachia, is a place where the mountains rise like ancient sentinels. Their slopes are tangled with dogwood and bramble, their hollows shrouded in perpetual dusk. The air here is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a world where sunlight filters through the canopy in a thin, uncertain ribbons. It is a land that resists intrusion, where roads dissolve into mud and memory, and where the past lingers just beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. In the early decades of the 20th century, this region was a patchwork of small, insular communities, each one bound by blood, faith, and the unspoken rules of survival. According to county records from the era, families in these hills often lived and died within a few miles of their birthplace, their names repeating across generations like a litany. The outside world, with its wars and depressions, its shifting tides of progress and decay, seemed to pass by at a distance, leaving only faint ripples in the lives of those who called these mountains home. Yet even among the isolated, there were those who stood apart. The family at the heart of Pine Hollow, whose true name has been lost to redaction and rumor, was one such anomaly. Census ledgers between 1921 and 1961 list a single surname, repeated without interruption across 3 generations. There is no mention of spouses, no neighboring names, no indication that anyone had ever left or arrived. Church records, too, tell a story of gradual withdrawal, a family once present at winter gatherings, their baskets set quietly at the back of the pews, who vanished from the rolls in a single season, leaving behind only a half-legible baptism and a note of disagreement over godparent selection. The land itself seemed to conspire in their disappearance. The terrain around Pine Hollow is steep and unforgiving, a labyrinth of ravines and ridges where even the bravest surveyors hesitated to tread. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the Hush House, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and fascination, though no one could recall who had first coined it. By the time the state surveyors arrived in 1961, the property had been absent from all official maps for over half a century. The forest had reclaimed the old paths, roots twisting over stone and memory alike, as if nature itself sought to seal away whatever had transpired within those walls. Yet the house remained, untouched by time's usual decay. Its timbers, though sagging, held firm. The iron spikes that sealed the door were pitted with rust, but unyielding. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of wax and old blood, a stillness so profound that even the dust seemed reluctant to settle. There were no photographs, no certificates, no graves, only the arrangement of objects, each one placed with deliberate intent, as if to preserve a ritual whose meaning had long since been lost. It is here, in this liminal space between presence and absence, that the true nature of the Pine Hollow family begins to emerge. Theirs was not a story of sudden tragedy or violent upheaval, but of a slow, methodical retreat from the world, a retreat marked by the erasure of individuality, the suppression of memory, and the elevation of bloodline above all else. The evidence of this doctrine is scattered throughout the house. 11 narrow beds arranged in 3 rooms, a child's chair bolted to the hearth, every mirror removed or shattered, as if the very act of reflection had become a threat. But the most disturbing artifact lay hidden behind a false wall, sealed in wax and blood, a journal, its pages written backward in cramped, curling script. The ink later confirmed to be human, drawn from multiple sources. There were no names, only initials, no stories, only repetitions. The journal was not a diary, but a manifesto, a record of births and corrections, of rituals and excisions, of a line that must remain clean, or else end. The family's presence in the official record is as spectral as their presence in the house. Census takers noted the same surname, the same initials, decade after decade, but never a face, never a voice. School board minutes from 1925 mention a visit to the property, where children were seen only behind glass, their mother speaking in echoes, refusing entry to the home. No child from the household was ever registered in any district school thereafter. Birth registries list the same surname for both mother and father, or leave the maternal field blank. In some cases, only the initial L appears a cipher in place of a name. What could drive a family to such extremes? The answer, perhaps, lies in the doctrine preserved within the blood-written journal, a doctrine not of faith or redemption, but of anatomy and inheritance. The entries speak of lineal perfection, of traits to be amplified and defects to be culled. There is no mention of God, no invocation of divine will. Instead, the language is cold, clinical, and relentless. Only the clean shall multiply. Pairings are recorded not as unions of love, but as equations. LL plus LL yields second formation. No deviation in teeth, breaths evenly, no stammer. Those who diverge are marked for excision. Their fate left unspoken but unmistakable. The house itself becomes a character in this unfolding tragedy, a vessel for the family's obsessions, its walls absorbing the rituals and silences of generations. The arrangement of beds, the absence of mirrors, the bolted high chair all speak to a life governed by rules that grow ever more rigid as the years pass. Even the land outside seems to reflect this inward turn. No graves, no markers, only the tangled roots and the brittle carpet of leaves that never decompose. Yet within this closed system, anomalies persist. The journal, though written in a single hand, betrays subtle shifts in pressure and style, as if the writer's identity were itself unstable. Passed from one to another like a mask, later entries become erratic, the language collapsing into glyphs and mirrored sigils, the meaning lost even to those who would decipher it. One line, repeated across the final pages, stands out in its desperate clarity. We were not meant to bend outward. It is in these moments of fracture that the humanity of the Pine Hollow family flickers into view. Beneath the weight of doctrine and repetition, there are hints of doubt, confusion, even fear. A final voice, hesitant and uncertain, breaks the pattern. They are pure, but they are wrong. The house, once a fortress against the world, becomes a prison of sameness. Its inhabitants not individuals, but echoes reflections of reflections. Each generation a paler replica of the last. The silence that greeted the surveyors in 1961 was not the silence of peace, but of exhaustion, a lineage that had folded in upon itself until nothing remained but the memory of what it once was. The evidence, though fragmentary, is undeniable. The blood-stained journal, the anatomical sketches, the sealed rooms, and the vanished graves. Each detail, each absence, is a clue in a puzzle whose solution lies not in the supernatural, but in the darkest corners of human nature. As the investigation into Pine Hollow deepened, the boundaries between the ordinary and the uncanny began to blur. The family's refusal to engage with the outside world, their obsession with purity and repetition, their erasure from every public record, all point to a pathology that is at once deeply personal and chillingly universal. What begins as a story of rural isolation becomes, in the end, a meditation on the dangers of obsession, the fragility of identity, and the terrible cost of forgetting how to be human. And so, as the last light fades from the hollow and the house settles once more into its vigil of silence, one is left to wonder, what other secrets lie buried in the forgotten corners of the world? How many stories, like that of Pine Hollow, wait in the shadows, unseen, unspoken, and all the more haunting for their silence? The first true breach of the hush house's silence did not come with a crash, but with the slow, deliberate prying of old iron from ancient wood. When the state team returned in June, accompanied by deputies and a historian, the air was thick with anticipation and a kind of dread that clung to the skin. The front door, wedged shut for decades, yielded only after a series of groans and splinters, as if the house itself resented the intrusion. Sunlight, pale and uncertain, spilled across the threshold, illuminating a tableau frozen in time. Inside, the house was eerily intact. 11 iron beds stood in 3 rooms, mattresses stripped bare, each aligned with ritualistic precision. In the kitchen, a warped high chair was bolted to the floor beside a cold hearth. Every mirror had been removed, the nails wrenched out, leaving scars in the plaster. The air was heavy, tinged with wax, old wood, and something metallic. There were no photographs, no certificates, no sign of modern life, only the arrangement of objects, each one placed with deliberate intent, as if to preserve a ritual whose meaning had long since been lost. The investigators moved in silence, discovering a dresser blocking a closet, a false panel sealed with pitch and animal hide. Behind it, a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages written in reverse, the ink later confirmed as human blood. There were no names, only initials M, E, R, J, and the ever-present LL. The entries were not stories, but instructions and genealogical records, lists of births, corrections, and phrases like retained, folded out. No mention of daily life, only the relentless cataloging of bodies and traits, as if the family existed solely to perpetuate a line. One entry described the cleansing of a mind corrupted by outer talk. Another noted the second child born right-blooded, followed by details on posture, silence, and teeth. Physicality was a moral concern: narrow hips, fused toes, the alignment of eyes. Corrections were genealogical, not medical. The doctrine was clear: only the clean shall multiply. A pattern emerged, a philosophy of containment, not expansion. The family refined itself, generation after generation, until the line folded in on itself. The fewer the variables, the fewer the flaws, the fewer the flaws, the closer to lineal perfection. The language grew colder, the tone mechanical. By 1959, the writing had deteriorated into glyphs, still reversed, still in blood. The final line, sealed with a thumbprint, read, "We were not meant to bend outward." The house itself bore witness to this doctrine. Beds arranged with precision, mirrors banished, a high chair bolted to the floor. The basement door was sealed, and no further excavations were allowed. The only other papers were a torn hymnal and a defaced almanac. The collapse of the family was not accidental, but ritualized. The conviction that the purer the blood, the less human it had to remain, echoed through every artifact and silence. The journal, now under restricted access, was examined by linguists and psychologists. Some reported insomnia, nausea, and dreams of windowless rooms where children scribbled in unison, never making a sound. The handwriting, across 40 years, never deviated, as if the same hand had written it all. The earliest entries were formal, as if the writer was a steward, not a subject. They began with a phrase, reversed and underlined: "Only the clean shall multiply." No mention of God, only anatomical traits to be amplified or culled. Pairings were equations, not unions. Those who diverged were excised. The philosophy was contain me, not expansion. By the 1940s, the journal suggested a loss of cohesion. Multiple births in a year, mothers marked only by glyphs, fathers never named. The seed corrects, the womb adapts, all forms are retested. Descriptions of spine lengthening successful, cleft reduced, digits even replaced any mention of love or biology. Mating was folding. Those unfit were marked with single letters, FD or S. The meaning of these codes remains uncertain. No names, no individuality, only initials. The conviction, the purer the blood, the less human it became. Church ledgers, school forms, and marriage rolls once listed the family. But after 1921, the name vanished. No formal departure, no excommunication, no illness. They simply withdrew. Census records told a different story. In 1930, 5 individuals at Pine Hollow. In 1949, by 1950, 11, all with the same surname. First names only variations of a few initials. No occupations, no education, no known languages. The household's respondent was always unavailable. School board minutes noted children seen only behind glass, never registered in any school. The birth registry showed no maternal identity after 1924. Sometimes only the initial L appeared. 40 years, 11 births, no marriages, no outside names, no death certificates. An anonymous letter described children walking the same path at the same hour, wearing identical garments. Never speaking. I thought one was a mirror until it blinked. By 1961, no neighbors admitted to knowing the residents. The property was called the Hush House. What remained inside suggested ritual without interruption, a family line looping in on itself, engineered to exclude outsiders. The children were not born into the world. They were built to remain outside of it. The journal revealed not just repetition of names, but a compression of time between births and roles. Early entries showed a household with adults and children, but by the 1930s, pairings were listed by initials and birth markings, not relationships. M plus M ears aligned equals are void of speech. These were formulas, not legacies. Intervals between births shortened. Sometimes the same monogram appeared twice in a year, suggesting the absence of generational distinction. By the 1940s, lineage was no longer referenced, only similarity. Infants were well mirrored, complete over previous. The children were not relatives, but reflections, recreations of older stock, repetitions of blood, by design. University reviewers noted some births were corrective, as if each generation tried to undo the last's failures. One birth excess digits removed. Another sits before speech held posture. Anatomical sketches, reversed like the text, showed uncanny symmetry. The later children did not just resemble their parents, they became them. One investigator remarked the portraits doubled backward. Reflections of reflections, each generation a paler replica. Enclosed population biology. This is generational mirroring traits compounding in recursive loops. With no outside variables, identity collapses into repetition. The journal gave no sign the children understood themselves as singular. A 1951 entry, the new M speaks as old M did, without prompt. Another, a child, recognized herself in the mirror but did not react expectation, not confusion. By the final decade, the journal became erratic. Pages warped, ink faded, handwriting stiffened. One line repeated, "Let them not pass." But loop, the family, no longer moved forward. They were folding inward. Yet the horror was not only in the words, but in the evidence left behind. The arrangement of beds, the bolted chair, the sealed basement, the absence of mirrors all pointed to a life lived under constant scrutiny, where deviation was not tolerated and individuality was a threat. The house itself became a character in this tragedy, its walls absorbing the rituals and silences of generations. Even the land outside seemed to reflect this inward turn. No graves, no markers, only tangled roots and a brittle carpet of leaves that never decomposed. The collapse of the family was not spontaneous decay, but a chosen, repeated ritual, the doctrine, rather than breaking under the weight of madness, calcified into a sacred logic. No names were ever written, no individuality acknowledged, only initials. The conviction, the purer the blood, the less human it had to remain. As the investigation deepened, the boundaries between the ordinary and the uncanny blurred. The family's refusal to engage with the outside world, their obsession with purity and repetition, their erasure from every public record all point to a pathology that is at once deeply personal and chillingly universal. What began as a story of rural isolation became, in the end, a meditation on the dangers of obsession, the fragility of identity, and the terrible cost of forgetting how to be human. The turning point in the Pine Hollow investigation arrived not with a single revelation, but with a cascade of evidence that forced even the most skeptical to confront the truth. The house, once a fortress of silence, now yielded its secrets to the relentless scrutiny of science and law. Forensic teams, equipped with the latest technology of the era, combed through every inch of the property. They catalogued stains, fibers, and fragments, each one a silent witness to decades of ritual and isolation. In the attic, beneath the warped floorboards, they discovered a series of shallow indentations too regular to be the work of time or accident. Each depression matched the size and shape of a child's body, as if generations had lain there in perfect alignment. Night after night, chemical analysis of the dark stains revealed traces of human blood. Some recent, some so old that only the faintest residue remained. In a hidden cavity behind the master bedroom, 3 strands of hair were found, knotted together and sealed in wax. Decades later, DNA analysis would confirm that these strands did not match any known samples from the journal or the house, raising questions that no one could answer. The most chilling discovery was a set of 5 yellowed cards, each marked with a mirrored letter, strung along a length of twine and nailed to the wall. When viewed in reflection, the letters spelled a single word: still. Forensic linguists debated the meaning, but the consensus was clear. This was not a message for the outside world, but a command, a doctrine, a warning to those within. Testimony from the period records the reactions of those who handled these objects. One archivist resigned after cataloging the journal, citing persistent nausea and dreams of children sitting in silence, their faces turned away. Another described a sensation of being watched, as if the house itself resented the exposure of its secrets. The evidence was overwhelming, not only in its physicality, but in its psychological impact. The line between observer and participant began to blur, and the investigators found themselves haunted by the very story they sought to unravel. As the investigation deepened, the need for confession, some voice to break the silence, became inescapable. It was not a living witness who spoke, but the words left behind, the final entries in the journal, written in a hand that trembled with uncertainty. The confession was not a single statement, but a series of fragmented thoughts, each one more desperate than the last. "I'm not the first," one entry began. The ink faded and uneven. "They move in rhythm, but it is not mine. They speak my name, but not with mouths." The writer described a growing sense of alienation, of being watched and imitated by figures who wore his clothes, mimicked his limp, and smiled too long in silence. He recounted waking in rooms he did not remember entering, finding mirrors where windows had been, and hearing voices that echoed his own thoughts before he could speak them. The confession grew darker, more frantic. "I woke inside the wall," the writer scrawled, the words barely legible. "One holds a book with blank pages. Another walks without bending his knees. They know my thoughts before I write them." The sense of self, once fragile, now fractured entirely. The writer no longer distinguished between himself and the others. "They are pure, but they are wrong," he wrote, the phrase repeated like a prayer. "Do not let them learn the outside." The final pages of the journal abandoned all pretense of order. Some were filled with repeated words, others with ink blots that refused to dry. One page was covered entirely in backward rows of the letter M. Across the top, a mirrored phrase: "One will not blend." The last full entry was a list, each line beginning with the word seal the pantry, seal the stairwell, seal the attic floor, seal the names, seal the memory, seal the blood. The final command: seal the house, let it be the grave. No one must survive the ruin. Authorities who examined the house after these revelations noted that many of these commands had, in fact, been carried out. Rooms were nailed shut, hallways blocked by collapsed furniture, the pantry filled with stones. All mirrors had been removed or blackened. Even the fireplace had been stuffed with hay and lye. Only the front door remained untouched, as if left to be found, perhaps deliberately. A final phrase, scratched into the inside of a closet wall, echoed this intention. It was not written in ink, but gouged into the wood. The letters reversed, but decipherable. "We could not be buried, so we became the house. No human remains were ever found, but blood traces lingered in every room, some old, some recent. One long smear ran from the base of the attic door to the lower stairwell, stopping midway, with no footsteps following. The confession, though fragmented, was complete in its horror. The doctrine of purity, the ritual of correction, the erasure of self, these were not the acts of a single madman, but the culmination of generations, each one complicit in the silence. The house was not merely a tomb, but a monument to the dangers of obsession, the cost of forgetting how to be human. The legal and societal repercussions of these discoveries rippled outward, unsettling the community and the institutions tasked with preserving the record. The journal, deemed too volatile for public release, was sealed under medical ethics protocols, its contents restricted to a handful of researchers. The property itself was reclassified as a hazard, its boundaries marked and patrolled, though no one dared approach after sunset. In the county courthouse, the case was reduced to a series of administrative notes: anomalous property, sensitive genealogical material, unresolved evidence. The family's name was redacted from all public records, their census entries archived but stripped of first names, their existence receding into rumor and footnote. The house, once a place of ritual and repetition, became a symbol of what the community wished to forget. Yet the impact was not confined to the archives. Local residents, once dismissive of the stories, now spoke in hushed tones of the hush house, warning children to keep their distance. The land around Pine Hollow, once fertile, grew wild and untended. No animals nested within its shadow, and the soil, though rich, yielded nothing but tangled roots and brittle leaves. The silence that had once protected the family now isolated the land itself, as if the curse of repetition had seeped into the earth. The legal system, confronted with the absence of living perpetrators, could offer no justice. There were no trials, no sentences, only the slow, bureaucratic burial of evidence. The journal was classified under a statute designed for cases of extreme mental illness. Its location moved to a restricted annex, its access code known only to a select few. The house was resealed, its windows boarded, its doors chained, its story left to fester in the dark. But the consequences extended beyond law and record. The investigators who had entered the house found themselves changed, haunted by dreams and compulsions they could not explain. Some developed a habit of writing in reverse. Others reported a persistent sense of being watched, as if the house itself had followed them home. The community, too, was altered, its boundaries redrawn, its history rewritten, its silence deepened. In the months that followed, the hush house became a magnet for the curious and the desperate. Urban explorers, amateur ghost hunters, and thrill seekers from distant towns made their way to Pine Hollow, drawn by rumors of the forbidden. Some left with nothing but stories. Others left with a sense of unease that lingered for weeks. A few vanished altogether, their disappearances chalked up to the dangers of the wild, but whispered about in the same breath as the house itself. The local folklore grew richer, more elaborate. Tales spread of a spectral child seen at the attic window, of a woman's voice singing lullabies in a language no one recognized, of footsteps echoing in the empty halls long after midnight. Some claimed that the house itself shifted, its rooms rearranging themselves to confuse intruders, its doors opening and closing of their own accord. The more the community tried to forget, the more the hush house asserted its presence, a wound that refused to heal. The psychological impact on the town was profound. Children grew up with warnings whispered at bedtime. Tales of the hush house used to frighten them into obedience. Some, as adults, would admit to feeling a strange pull toward the property, a compulsion to walk its boundaries or to stand in the shadow of its walls. Listening for something they could not name, the story became a test of courage, a rite of passage, and a source of nightmares. Meanwhile, the academic world debated the meaning of the evidence. Was the Pine Hollow case a unique aberration or a symptom of deeper currents in American history? Some scholars argued that the family's fate was the logical endpoint of a culture obsessed with purity and lineage, a warning about the dangers of isolation and the seductive power of tradition. Others saw in the hush house a metaphor for the ways in which trauma can echo across generations, shaping lives long after the original wound has been inflicted. The journal, with its mirrored script and blood-stained pages, became an object of fascination and dread. Linguists struggled to decode its symbols. Psychologists speculated about the effects of ritual and repetition on the mind, and historians traced the family's lineage through faded census records and church ledgers. Yet for all their efforts, the core of the mystery remained intact, a silence that could not be broken, a truth that refused to be named. As the years passed, the hush house settled into the uneasy space between history and legend. The official narrative was sparse, stripped of names and details, but the unofficial one grew in the telling. Children whispered of ghosts in the attic, of faces glimpsed in the windows at night. Some claimed to hear faint tapping from within the walls, or to see lights flickering behind the boarded-up glass. The land itself seemed to resist closure, as if the curse of repetition had seeped into the earth. The legacy of the Hush House was not confined to the property or the archives. It seeped into the collective memory, a stain that could not be scrubbed away. Those who had entered the house, investigators, archivists, even the occasional trespasser, reported dreams that lingered for weeks, dreams of mirrored corridors and silent children, of voices that spoke in reverse. Some found themselves compulsively tracing patterns in dust or writing their own names backward, as if the logic of the house had infected their minds. The fate of the family remained a subject of speculation and debate. No bodies were ever found, no graves unearthed. The journal's final entries hinted at a dissolution so complete that even death could not claim them. We could not be buried, so we became the house. One line read, scratched into the wood with desperate force. Some believed that the family had simply faded into the walls, their identities absorbed by the rituals they had created. Others wondered if a few had escaped, carrying the doctrine with them into the wider world. Seeds of silence waiting to take root elsewhere. The unanswered questions multiplied. What had become of the children marked as excised or folded out? Did any of them survive, or were they lost to the same silence that claimed their kin? Was the doctrine truly unique to Pine Hollow? Or was it merely the most extreme expression of a darkness that lurked in other, less visible corners of society? The evidence, though concrete, offered no comfort. Each artifact, each entry, each stain was a fragment of a puzzle that refused to resolve. In the end, the Hush House stood as both a warning and a challenge. Its legacy was not merely one of horror, but of inquiry, a demand that the living confront the shadows in their own histories and ask what it means to remember, to forget, and to become. The aftermath of the Pine Hollow revelations was not a clean break, but a slow, grinding transformation that left scars on the land and in the minds of those who remained. The Hush House, once a fortress of secrets, now stood as a monument to collapse, its windows, forever blind, reflected only the shifting seasons and the wary glances of passers-by. The doors, chained and rusted, became a boundary not just of property, but of memory, a line that few dared to cross. In the months that followed the investigation, the community struggled to redefine itself. Some families packed up and left, unable to bear the weight of proximity to such darkness. Others stayed, their routines unchanged, but their conversations forever altered. The Hush House became a landmark of absence, a place where the past pressed in on the present, refusing to be forgotten. The silence that had once protected the family now became a curse, a reminder that some secrets, once unearthed, can never be buried again. The land itself seemed to mourn. Each spring, wildflowers returned, but their colors were muted, the petals sunken and almost translucent. The trees grew in twisted patterns, their branches reaching away from the house as if recoiling from an invisible touch. On certain nights, when the wind shifted, neighbors claimed to hear faint music drifting from the property, a melody with no source, echoing the hymns once sung within those walls. Livestock avoided the old boundary stones, and even the birds seemed to fly wide of the property, as if the air itself had soured. The psychological scars ran deeper than the physical. Generations of children grew up with warnings whispered at bedtime. Tales of the hush house used to frighten them into obedience. Some, as adults, would admit to feeling a strange pull toward the property, a compulsion to walk its boundaries or to stand in the shadow of its walls, listening for something they could not name. The story became a test of courage, a rite of passage, and a source of nightmares. Yet the hush house's influence did not end at the edge of the property. In the years that followed, a subtle unease crept into the wider region. Local legends multiplied, each more elaborate than the last. Some spoke of a curse that would befall anyone who lingered too long near the house. Others claimed that the family's bloodline had not ended, but had simply gone underground, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. There were stories of strangers passing through town, their eyes too bright, their voices too soft, who asked questions about the house and then vanished without a trace. The local library began to receive anonymous donations, old photographs, faded letters, even a child's slate covered in mirrored writing. Each artifact was carefully catalogued, but no one could say where they had come from. The town's historical society, once a sleepy organization devoted to preserving pioneer quilts and church records, found itself at the center of a growing storm of curiosity and fear. Researchers from distant universities requested access to the archives, hoping to find some clue that would unlock the mystery. Some left disappointed, others left unsettled, convinced that the truth was more disturbing than any fiction. The hush house became a symbol, not just of a family's downfall, but of the dangers that lurk in the spaces between memory and forgetting. It was invoked in sermons and school assemblies, a cautionary tale about the perils of pride and the necessity of compassion. Yet for all the warnings, the house retained its power. On moonless nights, teenagers dared each other to touch the front door, to peer through the cracks in the boards, to listen for the sound of footsteps on the other side. Some returned with nothing but stories. Others returned changed, quieter, more withdrawn, as if they had glimpsed something they could not explain. The story of Pine Hollow spread beyond the county lines, carried by journalists, folklorists, and the occasional true crime podcaster. Each retelling added new details, new theories, new layers of meaning. Some focused on the psychological dimensions of the case, the effects of isolation, the corrosive power of secrecy, the ways in which trauma can echo across generations. Others delved into the supernatural, speculating about curses, hauntings, and the possibility that the house itself was alive, feeding on the fears of those who approached it. Yet, for all the speculation, the core of the story remained elusive. The journal, with its mirrored script and blood-stained pages, was both a key and a lock, a record of suffering and survival, but also a barrier to understanding. The more scholars studied it, the more questions it raised. Why had the family chosen to erase themselves so completely? What had they hoped to achieve by folding inward, generation after generation, until nothing remained but ritual and silence? And what, if anything, could be learned from their example? The hush house, in its ruined grandeur, became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking answers. Some came to pay their respects, leaving offerings of wildflowers or coins at the threshold. Others came to challenge the darkness, to prove to themselves that they were not afraid. A few came in search of redemption, hoping that by confronting the past, they could free themselves from its grip. Most left with more questions than answers, haunted by the sense that the house was watching, waiting, remembering. As the decades passed, the boundaries between fact and folklore blurred. The official records, stripped of names and details, offered little comfort. The unofficial stories, passed from parent to child, grew in the telling. Some claimed that the hush house was a nexus, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Others believed it was a mirror, reflecting the fears and obsessions of those who gazed too long into its depths. The legacy of Pine Hollow was not confined to the property or the archives. It seeped into the collective memory, a stain that could not be scrubbed away. Those who had entered the house, investigators, archivists, even the occasional trespasser, reported dreams that lingered for weeks. Dreams of mirrored corridors and silent children, of voices that spoke in reverse. Some found themselves compulsively tracing patterns in dust or writing their own names backward, as if the logic of the house had infected their minds. The fate of the family remained a subject of speculation and debate. No bodies were ever found, no graves unearthed. The journal's final entries hinted at a dissolution so complete that even death could not claim them. We could not be buried, so we became the house. One line read, scratched into the wood with desperate force. Some believed that the family had simply faded into the walls, their identities absorbed by the rituals they had created. Others wondered if a few had escaped, carrying the doctrine with them into the wider world. Seeds of silence waiting to take root elsewhere. The unanswered questions multiplied. What had become of the children marked as excised or folded out? Did any of them survive, or were they lost to the same silence that claimed their kin? Was the doctrine truly unique to Pine Hollow, or was it merely the most extreme expression of a darkness that lurked in other, less visible corners of society? The evidence, though concrete, offered no comfort. Each artifact, each entry, each stain was a fragment of a puzzle that refused to resolve. In the end, the Hush House stood as both a warning and a challenge. Its legacy was not merely one of horror, but of inquiry, a demand that the living confront the shadows in their own histories and ask what it means to remember, to forget, and to become. As the story draws to a close, the questions it raises linger, unresolved and unsettling. What is the true cost of purity, of silence, of the relentless pursuit of perfection? Can a community ever truly recover from the revelation of such darkness? Or does the stain remain, invisible but indelible, passed down through memory and fear? The Hush House, with its boarded windows and sealed doors, remains a monument to the dangers of secrets kept too long. Its story is a reminder that the past is never truly past, that the echoes of old obsessions can shape the present in ways both subtle and profound. The evidence, blood, ink, silence endures, a testament to the power of what is left unsaid. And so, the final warning: beware the comfort of forgetting, beware the allure of purity, the seduction of repetition, the safety of silence. For in the end, it is not the house that haunts the land, but the questions it leaves behind, questions that wait in the dark, patient and unblinking, for someone brave enough to answer. What other secrets lie hidden in the forgotten corners of the world? How many stories, like that of Pine Hollow, wait in the shadows, unseen, unspoken, and all the more haunting for their silence?